And today we're going to talk about prompt hierarchy. What is prompt hierarchy? That is the first question that we would like to answer. So as you can see in this visual, I have full physical, partial physical, modeling, gestural, verbal, visual, and independent. These are listed out as from most intrusive to least intrusive. Independent is considered to be least intrusive, as this is when the individual will perform the task or demand on their own. Full physical, on the other hand, is the most intrusive. This is when someone will come in and full physically show the individual how to do the task or demand. As you can see, there's two arrows pointing. This arrow points and goes from most to least. This is one way you can use this hierarchy. You can go from full physical, fade to a partial physical, fade to modeling, fade to gesture, fade to verbal, visual, independent, and so on. On the other hand, this arrow points least to most, and this is another way you can teach individuals a new task or skill. You can go from independent, visual, verbal, gestural, and so on. It is very important to use prompt hierarchy. It's an important tool for teaching skills. There has been a lot of research that has shown its effectiveness in teaching new skills. For example, it has shown to teach least to most prompting has shown to teach kids at a quicker rate than most to least prompting. However, most to least prompting doesn't allow for many errors and has been shown to lessen the amount of errors that the individual engages in. However, it is important to take different variables into account when you're deciding to use least to most or most to least. For example, you need to think of the skill that you're going to teach, as well as the individual you are teaching. For a child who does not tolerate being touched, full physical may not be an appropriate choice. You might have to choose something different. In these situations, you need to analyze both the skill as well as the individual before deciding on the prompt. First, we'll start talking about full physical. Full physical is the most intrusive prompt, as this requires hand-over-hand guiding the individual. An example of this is when teaching an individual to touch the correct picture, the teacher will hand over hand guide the individual to touch it. So this would look like me, if I'm the teacher, saying, find the computer. I would physically grab the child's hand and guide them to the computer to touch it, the child or the individual, I'm sorry. That would be full physical. Next, we have partial physical, which is less intrusive than full physical, but still on that end. An example of this is when teaching an individual to sign swing, a teacher may move only one hand to the correct position to prompt the individual for the correct swing sign. So this may look like me moving a hand over to the correct position and then the child finishing the sign. It may also look like moving, so if the child does this, I might also partially physically just move the hands over so they're in the correct position. Next, we have modeling. Modeling is hands off. This is not when you will not be physically guiding the child or individual in any way. An example of this is when teaching an individual the sign swing, the teacher does the sign themselves for the individual to imitate. So this may look like me teaching my client the sign swing and saying swing, and then them doing it as well. Or if they're pointing to the swing, I may go like this and they will imitate that to get access to the swing. Next up, we have gestural. So again, this is not physical at all. We're going closer towards the less intrusive side of the prompt hierarchy. So an example of this is when teaching an individual to brush the teeth, the teacher will point to the next step. So if a child is learning to brush all sides of their teeth in order, the teacher may point to the next step. So let's say they brush this first and this is next. The teacher may point right here on themselves or on the individual. This may also look like when, for example, we talked about touching the picture. You could also use gestural here. You could say find the picture and you gesture to the picture and the individual then touches it themselves. Next, we have verbal. This is an example. An example of this is when asking individuals to recall an event, the teacher may use verbal cues surrounding that event to prompt the individual. So an example of this may be like, tell me what you did last weekend. And the individual says, I don't know. The teacher may say, well, it was a Saturday. And then kind of give verbal hints as to what may have occurred. Another example of this, using the toothbrushing example, when the child picks up the toothbrush, if the next step is getting toothpaste, the teacher might say toothpaste, or it's time to, after they have the toothpaste, when it's time to brush teeth, the teacher might say teeth. This is a verbal cue to prompt the individual to complete the demand or task. Next, we'll talk about visual. So this is the second to last prompt. An example of this is when teaching individuals to wash their hands. The teacher may hold up a picture of soap to prompt the individual to get soap. Another example of this might be if we go back to brushing teeth. We could also hold up a picture of toothpaste if we're prompting the child or individual to get toothpaste. There's many different ways you can use this visual prompt in many different situations. Lastly, the least intrusive prompt that we have is independent. So when asking an example of this is when asking an individual to find an object or picture, the teacher uses no prompts and allows the individual to find it themselves. So this would mean that the individual, when you say find the picture, the teacher is not prompting at all and allows the individual to try to find it themselves. Similarly, when we talked about washing hands and brushing teeth, the teacher would allow the individual to go to the next step and try the next step themselves without any prompting. This is the whole prompt hierarchy. And while these are 7 of the most common, there are others such as echoics, or you could even use a multi-prompting system to teach skills. It really depends, like we talked about, on the individual and the task that you are trying to teach. It really requires you to analyze all different parts of it. Thanks for coming to my presentation.